Welcome to the Compact Disasters podcast from compactdisasters.com, the show where we explore natural and human-made disasters from around the world. This is episode 48, the 1955 Le Mans disaster. On the 11th of June 1955, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, one of the world's most prestigious and oldest endurance races, was underway at the Circuit de la Sarthe in France. The race had drawn automobile manufacturers like Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar, Ferrari, Maserati, and others. Spectators came not just for speed, but spectacle. The roaring cars, the drama of endurance, and a pit straight which passed very close to the crowd created an electrifying atmosphere. But safety standards had not kept pace with the increasing speed of the machines, nor with the growing size of the audience. Over the years, the Circuit de la Sarthe in Le Mans had been improved somewhat. The track was resurfaced in parts and widened here and there, yet certain features remained dangerously unchanged. The pit straight had no separate deceleration lane for cars entering the pits. There was only a low embankment, often just an earthen bank of several feet, between the track and the densely packed spectators. Grandstands offered limited protection. Spectators frequently crowded close to the racing line, eager for a better view. The cars themselves were becoming ever faster. Racing teams were forever pushing performance boundaries, and in that setting, minor errors could have catastrophic consequences. At about 6:26 in the evening, on lap 35, rain had begun to fall. The race was in full swing, headlights slicing through dusk, engines bellowing along the long straights. Mike Hawthorne, driving a Jaguar, approaching the pits for a scheduled stop, signalled his intent by lifting his arm. Just behind him was Lance Macklin in an Austin Healey. Hawthorne braked heavily to enter the pits, causing Macklin, caught by surprise, to swerve. Behind him was the French driver Pierre Levegh in his Mercedes-Benz, pushing hard in an effort to gain another lap. Levegh saw the swerving car ahead and attempted to avoid it, but at such speed there wasn't enough time or space. His car struck the rear of Macklin's, catapulting it forward. Levegh's vehicle then left the track, soared over a low embankment, disintegrated, and its burning debris hurtled into the ranks of spectators. Metal, engine parts, body panels and wheels flew into the grandstands. Some portions hit nearby structures and stairs. The car exploded. Fuel set aflame, worsened by the magnesium alloy used in its body. Flames leapt, burning debris showered the crowd, and disaster unfolded in seconds. Spectators were caught unprepared. The impact was sudden, terrifying. People in front row seats, those standing at balustrades and stairways, had no time to move. Debris struck many directly, and others were crushed as the crowd surged. Some witnesses described scenes of chaos, panicked scrambling, cries, and injured people lying among torn seats and wreckage. Bodies were burned. Many could not be identified. Spectators who had climbed ladders, scaffolding or temporary seating to gain better views were tragically exposed. The medical aid was overwhelmed. Hospitals in Le Mans and nearby towns received the injured, many suffering from burns, blunt trauma, broken bones or worse. Those killed included the driver Levegh and at least 80 spectators, often cited as 83 or more depending on the source, though exact numbers varied. Over 100 others were injured, some severely. It remains the deadliest single accident in motorsport history in terms of spectator fatalities and injuries. Despite the horror unfolding, the race was not immediately cancelled. Officials argued that stopping the event would trap spectators, block access for emergency services, and cause even more chaos. The cars were still racing. The battle between Jaguar, Mercedes, Ferrari and others continued while rescue efforts began. Some teams, including Mercedes, eventually withdrew in acknowledgement of the magnitude of the tragedy, but not until much later in the night. Spectators at parts of the circuit far from the crash site did not fully realize the scale of what happened until hours later. The trackside PA announcements were delayed, and communication was poor. Evening fell. Headlights flickered over the track. Racing continued, though under a cloud of grief and trauma. After the disaster, there was shock not just among spectators, but across governments and the motorsport world. An official inquiry was held to examine what happened. The inquiry acknowledged that no single driver was deemed criminally responsible. Some criticised Hawthorn for his braking and signalling. Others directed blame at Lance Macklin for his evasive actions. But the report focused heavily on the track design and safety arrangements. The layout of the pit straight, the lack of barriers, the closeness of spectators, and the minimal protective features between the track and stands were all identified as significant factors. Also criticised was the use of magnesium alloy in the car body. Magnesium burns more intensely than steel. Once ablaze, it is hard to extinguish with regular water-based firefighting measures. That intensified the fire and made the disaster worse. In the days that followed, there was mourning, funerals, and a stunned public. The French government, along with race organisers, introduced new regulations for racing circuits. Many countries temporarily banned motor racing until safety standards could be reviewed. Circuits in France, Germany, Spain, and elsewhere were inspected for hazards. Spectator stands were rebuilt or replaced. Pit areas were modified. Barriers were raised or widened. The spectator distance was increased, and the separation between the track and the crowd was improved. Mercedes-Benz, deeply shaken by what happened, withdrew from further racing until it felt conditions were safer. It didn't return to Formula One until 1994, and then only as an engine supplier. It took until 2010 for Mercedes-Benz to enter a works team. Some drivers retired. Some racing bodies faced pressure to impose tighter standards. The mentality of race at all costs began to shift under public pressure. The incident forced a reckoning with the risks motorsport posed, not just to drivers, but to fans. The 1955 Le Mans disaster left a lasting legacy. Racing circuits around the world were redesigned to reduce risk. Grandstands were moved further back, barriers were installed, and the trackside infrastructure was modernized. Spectator safety became a priority rather than a secondary concern. Fuel types, materials used in car body construction, and fire control measures were rethought. Car design, too, came under new scrutiny. Increased media coverage of the disaster changed how the public perceived motorsport. Journalism, newsreels, and photographs captured the horror. That tragic day was shown on newsreels around the world. Images of burnt bodies, crowds in mourning, and impassive drivers were seen far beyond the racing community. The disaster raised moral and ethical questions. When a public event becomes deadly, can it justify continuing? When does entertainment cost too much? Many drivers who survived that era later pushed for reforms, and some racing organizations gradually introduced rules limiting car speed, improving pit safety, fuel standards, material safety, and track layout. Some bans were imposed. In Switzerland, motor racing was banned for decades. In France, stricter oversight was applied. Sports car championships adopted safety standards for medical readiness at events. Eventually, lessons were learned, and they contributed to the development of much more stringent global motorsport regulations decades later. More than half a century later, that terrible crash still holds lessons. In contemporary discussions about safety in sports, mass gatherings, industrial design, and risk engineering, one can point back to that day in Le Mans. The disaster shows that progress in speed or technology must always be balanced with safety. That warning carries weight not just in motorsport, but in any domain where spectators are exposed to high velocities or explosive risks. It also reminds us that outrage and grief can lead to genuine change. Many safety measures we take for granted today in car racing, such as crash barriers, buffer zones, and trackside medical protocols, trace back, in part, to the reforms prompted by the 1955 accident. It transformed a sport that had celebrated raw power into one that began to value lives in the viewing stands as much as lap times. The tragedy changed lives forever. Families lost loved ones in horrifying ways. Spectators who should have cheered found themselves rescuing others or carrying the injured from the stands, forever marked by what they witnessed. Drivers carried guilt, real or perceived, over their choices and the tiny moments in traffic that involved speed. Cars were built differently afterwards. Circuits no longer took citizen spectators for granted. Each death became a plea for better design, better protocols, safer margins. What remains clear is that in the Le Mans disaster, no moment of recklessness by a single person fully explains what happened. Instead, many minor failings, safety lapses in design, ambiguous signalling, insufficient protection of spectators, construction materials ill-suited to crash fires, and weak regulation, all combined into a catastrophe that cost dozens of lives. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Compact Disasters podcast from compactdisasters.com. If you did, why not leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts? And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you would like to support us more directly, please consider buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/disaster coffee to see how. Also, please check out our other Compact podcasts. You will find them all at compacthistories.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.